Sutton.
Other than the misspellings, I think I agree 100% with the minutes, and so I will move their adoption.
All right, seconded by Representative Bourgeon. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thanks again. Okay, next item on the agenda committee is Senate Bill 467. Draw your attention to Senate Bill 467. This is the third time that we will be working the tourism bill. And so is there any objection to waiving the reading on the tourism bill? Seeing none. All right, so this is the plan. We are going to make a change to this regarding the effective date, and the purpose of doing so is not to create a blank shell, but to allow the Senate to come. We're going to conference on this bill, and the important parts of the Star Bond bill to save the food tax reimbursement will go into this as well. And so they are a single subject because it's tourism. So we're going to, because the Star Bond bill is tourism as well. And so we will conference on this. That's the intent of this. We're not trying to create a blank shell, and we are not trying to get rid of the tourism bill. Motion to change the effective date. Okay. To what's the effective date? Register. So that would be change it to from the register to it's on.
It's a change.
Yeah. Representative Bourgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would propose that we amend the effective date from the publishing of the statute book to publication in the register.
Second by Representative Penn. Any discussion on that? Right. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All against say no. Any further discussion? Motion passes. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Representative Bourgeon.
I'd make a motion to pass Senate Bill 467 as amended favorably.
Seconded by Representative Penn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All against say no. Motion passes. Okay, next item on the agenda is House Bill 2826. And we'll get a brief overview of what the bill does before we make changes.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. As the committee will recall, House Bill 2826 makes a number of changes to the regulatory regime regarding elevators, the Elevator Safety Act in particular, and among other things, it redefines the term elevator, modifies requirements for licensure, inspection, and testing of elevators, and the adoption of rules and regulations by the state fire marshal, among a number of other things. That's what the bill does.
Any questions for the revisor? All right, seeing none. Thank you. Committee, I have asked the fire marshal to be here today because this bill affects his department. And if you had any questions for him on how it will affect his department, we can ask him. He's not going to weigh in on policy because that's not his duty. His duty is to follow the law, but we want to make sure that we don't affect his department too much. Any discussion on the bill? I have an amendment, the first one. Representative Poston, do you have a question?
I have comments on the bill, please.
Okay, you want to go ahead and make the comments before we talk about changes, or do you want to?
Yes, I would.
Okay, go ahead.
Please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So committee, I left here yesterday with a whole lot of feelings and thoughts on this bill. You know, for every single person in the room who is in the gallery, who's sitting at these desks, elevators are a convenience. Every single one of us can get up and down stairs if we need to. And who I didn't see in this room were our disabled Kansans, and I'm here to speak on their behalf today. In particular, my husband uses a mobility scooter and he is unable to walk at all because he has secondary progressive MS that has progressed him to that point. What I want to make a very valid point here is that elevators are not a convenience to these Kansans. They are a lifeline to fully participate in life for people like my husband and our disabled vets. So I want to thank the neutral and opponent conferees for their points that they made yesterday. The fire marshal told a story of a Kansan who was stuck on the second floor, couldn't get down, and the firefighters came and walked out, carried that person down and carried their wheelchair down. Let me tell you that that can't happen for every Kansan, particularly those like my husband. He is in a 200-pound mobility scooter, and that can't be carried down the stairs. In addition to healthcare appointments and the business of daily life, elevators create full participation in life. And I want to recount a story that happened to my husband and I in September of 2021 when our daughter got married. And we were staying in a historic hotel and stopped there to change our clothes after the ceremony and before going to the reception. We rode the elevator up to the 11th floor. And in between the time that we got changed and were ready to leave, both elevators in the building were non-operational, and there were firefighters going up and down the stairs all over the whole place. And we were stuck on the 11th floor with no ability to get down to the wedding reception. And what I'm talking about here is missing the father of the bride speech, missing the father-daughter dance. We were very lucky because we called the hotel management in a panic, and probably illegally, they brought my husband down on a service elevator that was really old. But I want you to think about this, and I implore you not to undo 2 years of stakeholder work in putting together an elevator act to keep our Kansans safe. I don't want you to plunge, pun intended, people like my husband into unsafe circumstances. And please don't let him be the weight load test that fails. And I would like for you to consider this as we work this bill today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee.
All right, thank you for your comments. Would you go ahead and hand out the amendment? Okay, committee, some of the things that we talked about yesterday, we have broken amendments out into several different categories, I guess, to try to address most of the concerns from yesterday. The first one that this addresses is that any employee could just work on an elevator. The first thing the amendment does is make sure that they are directed by a licensed mechanic, and that the licensed mechanic is ultimately liable for the repairs or the inspection, and they are ultimately responsible, just similar to a contractor would be that has a contractor license that builds things, because that's where these mechanics used to be, is right underneath that. So this does the same thing that they used to do. However, there needs now to be a licensed mechanic overseeing it. The next thing this does is something that wasn't talked about yesterday, but was missed in the initial bill draft. And that has to be with licensed individuals, people with currently it's 8,000 hours in the bill that was drafted 2 years ago, 8,000 hours of work within the past 6 years. We've changed that to 4,000 because 4,000 hours is a lot to work on elevators, and they would have sufficient enough experience with 4,000 hours rather than 8,000 hours. Last thing, the next thing this does is address the frequency of inspections. And so, as you know, we have never had demanded inspections at the state level, and there are a lot of elevators that have never been inspected. This makes it so that the most used elevators are inspected every year. So the larger counties, any county that is 100,000 people or greater, will have to have their elevator inspected every year because they're used the most. And then any county that's larger than 50,000 would have to have their elevator inspected every 2 years. And then the rest of the state, the very small counties that don't get, the elevators don't get used as often, would be every 3 years. And so that was kind of a compromise there. Next, it was pointed out that some of these inspections could take a little bit longer than others. And so we changed the fee, the maximum fee, from $250 to $500. There might be some inspections that go 8 hours, and $500 may not be enough, but there also will be a lot of inspections that are much less than that time-wise. And if you recall, when this bill, those of you that were here when this bill was initially brought to us, it was told to us that these inspections don't really cost much. They're only a couple of $100. And so they're not. We've been receiving complaints that these things are costing $2,500, $4,000, and even higher. And so we want to make sure that they stick to what they promised us and that they're fair. If that needs to be addressed in the future, then we can come back and work on it in the future. On page 6, it just kind of goes along with the change that we made previously on the 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year inspection. Charles, did I leave anything out?
No, Chairman, just a note that this memo was prepared in a bit of a hurry. So on page 6, after the box, we'll have to strike and just insert certificates of operation, just to kind of go with the flow of the next sentence. So just a little fix there.
Technical fix. Committee, any questions on the amendment? Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Is this the only amendment today? Or?
No.
Okay.
This is, I think I have 3 or 4, and I'm sure there'll be other people offering amendments as well.
I may just wait. My question was on kind of associated with the things we do in the aircraft industry and certainly in the military. Is the person doing maintenance is not the person to certify. So I wanted to make sure that we had considered that as well. And I didn't know if that was, I didn't read it in here as a link, but I didn't know what's coming either.
That's not in this amendment. Although this amendment does it does tighten up the language from yesterday as far as the person working is directly responsible, or the licensee is directly responsible for the person working and oversees the inspection. Yeah,
I guess the point is, particularly when you're doing electrical work or things like that, work on aircraft engines and so on, the guy doing the repair has to step back, and then the inspector comes in and puts a tag on it or something. Thank you.
Representative Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Charles, I have a question on page 5, subsection C. The fee for an inspection conducted shall not exceed $500. Is that total? So for instance, let's just say here in the Capitol, there are 5 elevators that I know of. There may be a service elevator that I don't know of. So is that for the whole day? So it's $500 for the whole inspection, or $500 per elevator?
Well, subject to whatever the chairman says, um, I would say it's per elevator.
The inspection is per elevator. The bill already addresses that.
Okay, that was just one of my only concerns. I just want to say, um, from somebody who comes from a county that is under 50,000 and somebody who comes from a company that is a union company, we charge $145 an hour for our guys to go out and do inspections. And so my concern was just, at some schools, we charge $350 to do an inspection, but when we do the fire sprinkler inspection at Hayes Med, it takes 3 days. So we charge a lot more than that. So that was just my concern, is that we're not capping that portion, and that that their hourly rate will be part of it. But if it's $500 per elevator, I feel more comfortable with that. Thank you.
Any further questions on the amendment? I need a second for the amendment. Representative Sutton seconds the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. Okay, so the next amendment that we have, we researched some of the other states that were brought up yesterday and try to figure out how they resolve some of these issues. And in the state of Nebraska, they have a exemption for inspections because major insurance companies, when they insure an elevator, they do their own inspections, and they're pretty thorough. And so the state of Nebraska does not, yeah, they actually have buildings there, sir. They, this amendment simply states that if an insurance company does an inspection, that inspection would count as an elevator inspection, and it would be submitted to the fire marshal for approval. And to make sure that it is a real insurance company, it has to be AM Best rating of B or more. And so those of you that are familiar with insurance will recognize the name AM Best. They rate every insurance company in the nation, and they're the go-to for ratings of insurance companies. And B or better is very good. Any questions on this amendment? Charles.
Just a note for the committee that you received 2 documents. The single sheet is just a replacement for the first page of the rest of the amendment. So you can just rip off the first page of the stapled part and look at the single sheet that was carried out. And the difference is just a reference to the insurance rating agency, as the chairman explained. That's the only difference.
Okay. Any questions? Representative Probst? No. All right. Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How often does this new Section 1 go into effect? Is this at the beginning that they can get an inspection by the insurance company? Is this every time? Does this presuppose that insurance inspection surpasses everything else and they don't need to get continual inspections? Or do they have to get continual inspections as mandated by law and then go through the insurance company as well?
Yeah, so the underlying bill requires an inspection on a timely period, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, depending on the size of the county. All this says is that if an insurance company does an inspection and gives you a certificate of inspection, that will qualify for your inspection. And insurance companies will typically do them every year. If they do not, they'll have to have another inspector come in and do it because they're going to have it inspected each term.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we know? I certainly don't know, and I don't think we had testimony. Do insurance companies inspect this? Are they qualified to inspect an elevator to this capacity?
So major insurance companies manage risk. They have risk management departments, they have actuaries, they have underwriters. And when they insure an elevator, there's some concern there for liability because it's a huge liability if it doesn't operate correctly. And so they are qualified to look at the elevators, and they're protecting themselves as much as they are the business and the individual riding it. In the state of Nebraska, several states do it, but the state of Nebraska is where we got this from. Any further questions? Seconded by Representative Sutton. All in favor say aye. All against say no. Motion passes. Probably, yeah. Well, and again, committee, sorry for all the changes, but we did try our best to listen to all the conferees, and we spent a large amount of time reviewing all the written testimony, and we've tried to come up with some compromises here. This amendment that's being passed out was a request from our fire marshal, and it is in the case of an incident on an elevator, if somebody is hurt or there's some property damage, you are this causes the business to or the elevator operator to notify the fire department or the fire marshal that there has been an accident, and they are precluded from using their elevator until an inspector can get out there and make sure that it's safe to continue to use. It also, he had some concerns about elevators that were discontinued or shut down because of this law. He wanted to make sure that the signing was adequate. And so they would like to be the ones that come up with the creation of the signage that would go onto an elevator that would be shut down for temporary until it was repaired. And so that's what this amendment does. Charles.
So just a technical comment. So these would be 2 new sections to the bill. They would go in front of the bill before section 1, and then of course the sections would be renumbered.
Any question on what that amendment does? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The time frame in which, was there any pushback on I think you say it in here actually though, once the elevator or before the close of business the next day from the accident? So they're not operable until the state fire marshal can conduct an investigation. Does it stipulate in here how long they have to conduct said investigation?
Charles, I don't believe it does. It doesn't stipulate. However, if it takes 2 days, then it might be worth it to wait 2 days. Representative Sutton.
My understanding here from the text is that it wouldn't be in operation anyway. So whether it takes 1 day or 5 days to get it re-inspected, it wouldn't be in operation. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right. If the elevator continued to work, they still couldn't use it until somebody came out to look at it.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any further questions on this amendment? Representative Blue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my laptop died, so I don't have the testimony from the fire marshal. Did he put in his testimony how many people that we know of die from elevators? I'm just curious. Or
I don't know that I recall that in your testimony.
no, it's not in. Okay. That's just one thing. I'm just kind of curious if this is a issue or not. I mean, I support the amendment absolutely. I'm just curious if this is something that happens quite frequently or not. Thank you.
So I know we have had some injuries on elevators in Kansas. I don't know that we've had a death. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if I explained what my question was. I was just kind of curious, talking with Representative Sutton, if business had any qualms about the speed at which this inspection happens to get their elevator back up online so that they're not deadline in the business, that's all. I know there's a sensitivity toward how much manpower the fire marshal can push out all across, but just kind of trying to nail that down.
Mr. Fire Marshal, would you like to comment on the timeline on that? Or how you might do that?
Good afternoon. So I hope we don't have this, right? I hope we don't ever have to investigate one of these. If we do, we would handle it as an emergency situation. We would be dispatching people immediately. Investigations are better done as soon after an incident as possible while evidence is still there. So it would not be a long drawn out event unless, there could be that instance where we had to have professional engineers come in if there was an actual failure of, you get the idea. But we would definitely do everything we could to get that back in service as soon as it's safe.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Definitely supportive of the amendment. Thank you. That gives me great encouragement. Thank you.
Okay, seconded by Representative Penn. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All against say no. Motion passes. Okay. All right, committee. I think this is the last one that I have. Not exactly sure, but in reviewing the Nebraska statutes, they also do not have their mechanics also inspect elevators, and they don't have a dual class like our last bill did. And not quite sure how that would work anyway, because they have to be a mechanic. According to the bill, it's not clear on who can be an inspector or who can't be an inspector and what the qualifications are, the previous bill. And so what this does is it removes inspectors from the bill and just has mechanics, licensed mechanics doing the inspections. We currently have about 300 licensed mechanics in the state of Kansas and only 19 inspectors. And so this will kind of remove that barrier of people not getting inspected. And should the fire marshal have to declare an emergency, since we don't have any inspectors, the mechanics would do it anyway. And so we're just going to remove the requirement for an inspector. I would tell you that the opposing, somebody that opposes this amendment would tell you that there might be a conflict of interest with the mechanic inspecting an elevator or inspecting his own work. But the mechanic is ultimately responsible for his work and liable for it. In other states don't really have an issue with it, and the state of Nebraska does this. So, and it was one of the states that was cited yesterday. I would point out that on the last page, page 4, line 34, the inspections are referred to as annually. That is incorrect. The rest of the bill would apply because we changed it to 3-2-1. And so that annually shouldn't be there. Poskin, Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment does not address a mechanic inspecting his or her own work. There's no prohibition for that.
There
If
is no prohibition for that.
So a mechanic does work or installs an elevator and can also be inspector for it?
Yes.
Hmm.
And they do that. They have done that in the past. Representative Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to, I mean, granted, I'm coming from a different side. I'm coming from fire protection, but we install fire protection and we also inspect our own fire protection. And then we submit it to our local fire departments, so forth. We also teach, we have quite a few businesses that'll come out and they'll say, your fire sprinkler inspections are too expensive for us. Can you teach us how to do the fire sprinkler inspection? And in the end, it's the maintenance guy who's doing the fire sprinkler inspection, and then the insurance liability is on them, and it's not on us. So this is something that we do in our line of work. I support this amendment, and the more we mandate businesses to do these kind of things, the more money it's going to cost and it's going to come out of their pockets. So I support this and ask that you do too.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking at the very first amendment we did. I think this might. Does this contradict the page 4? Because the very first amendment we did, we set the schedule of 3 years, 2 years, and 1 year, and then this says annual.
Yeah,
So
I just mentioned that shouldn't be there because the previous amendment.
Mm-hmm. I missed that.
That's fine. People never listen to me anyway. It's cool. I'm good with it.
Disregard what I'm saying.
Representative Penn.
Yes, sir. Hey, the Fox watching the in-house to Representative Poskin's point, as well as Representative Blue, sir. The onus is on the inspector, i.e. the mechanic. Is there can the business or someone who's injured appeal their decision if they inspect it, give it a green light, something's wrong? How does that work?
Can you
I'm talking
elaborate
liability for the mechanic's inspection if it's faulty.
The liability goes back to the mechanic, yes. Mm-hmm. Representative Dodson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll just kind of restate what I was saying earlier, and that is that it doesn't really matter if the second guy is labeled inspector or not to me, but best practice shows that if you have one person doing the maintenance, the other guy ought to take a look at it and then sign off. This is what we use in most high-risk operations. I don't know where elevators fall in that risk spectrum, but things can go wrong, and the history is that not many things go wrong. So that's kind of a judgment call, I think. Thanks.
Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this amendment, are we striking elevator inspector altogether, it looks like?
Yeah, in the underlying bill, there's an additional $200 fee to become an inspector, a mechanic to become an inspector. And this just basically says a mechanic is an inspector. So it removes the inspection language, the inspector category language. Still a mechanic looking at your elevator.
I wonder if would be open to any discussion on allowing an inspector or another mechanic to inspect the work, just as a way to get at the not inspecting a person's own work. The only thing I can compare it to is what I do, which is writing. And I can write and spend days and days and days with an article. And it's not until I turn it over to somebody else that they look at it, that they see things that I completely missed because I've been looking at this too much and it's my own work. So I understand and appreciate what you're trying to do, but I wonder if we might,
entertain a conversation about allowing either an inspector or another mechanic who didn't do the work to be the inspector.
There was no discussion on that when we decided to follow the Nebraska statute. But I would liken it to a mechanic working on brakes. I think we could all agree that brakes on a car are very important and very dangerous if you do it incorrectly. However, a mechanic double inspect, they have checklists and they check off what they look at, and they look at it and check it off. And they don't have another mechanic come over and bill that time to double check his own work.
I can't argue with that, and I don't know how that process works. But I imagine that's right, that a mechanic shop does it, and they don't have another mechanic come over. But I won't push it too hard. But I just thought it would be worth a cover for someone other than the person doing the work to also be the inspector.
Representative Pascal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would support that discussion as well. Some kind of prohibition or an alternate way for the work to be inspected. Thank you.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move the adoption of this this last amendment.
Motion is to adopt the amendment by Representative Hoffman, seconded by Representative Blue. We can come back to your further discussion. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. On the discussion for a second mechanic reviewing the first mechanic's work, I don't know that I have an issue with that. So if you'd like to make if it keeps everybody happy, the whole goal is to accomplish something here that will pass, that will remove some of the errors from the first bill and give people breathing room until we can come up with a workforce development to get to people to where we need them to be, while trying to also keep everybody safe. And so if it makes you feel better to have a second pair of eyes on this, then so be it. If you want to make a motion to make sure that there's more than one mechanic that looks at the inspection.
Thank
That
you,
would be
Mr. Chair.
fine.
I'd like to make a motion for a conceptual amendment that makes sure that there is a second pair of eyes, mechanic or otherwise, or inspector, but we're taking inspector out. So I would move a conceptual amendment that prohibits the mechanic who has done the work to do the inspection. Thank you.
Okay. Seconded by Representative Probst. The motion is to make sure that there is a second mechanic that reviews the work of the first mechanic.
I would second that.
President Blue.
Thank you. Just to go into more detail on your amendment, is it same company? So say that you have 10 inspectors, can another person in that company, or does that have to be a completely separate company?
No, it does not have to be a separate company, just a separate, just the inspection needs to be done by a mechanic who did not do the work.
Okay. I see where you're coming from. I'm looking at it in a different lens. I guess I can support that simply because some companies do have multiple employees. I just feel bad for those that are just a single proprietor, and they don't have, so then they couldn't recoup and be part of that process. But for compromise purposes, I'll support it.
Thank you, Representative.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, you can close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close.
Committee heard the amendment, seconded by Representative Probst. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say no. Chairs in question. Everyone in favor, all in favor, raise your right hand. All against, raise your right hand. Your other right hand. Motion passes 9-6. Representative Probst with an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be a conceptual amendment, but a very, very simple one, I think. Basically, I just want to, under the definition of elevator, put back in the language that includes escalators.
Care to explain your amendment?
Sure. It would include escalators in the definition of elevators. Yeah.
So
It
we're
would include, yeah.
escalators as put.
So on line 14, elevator means any device for lifting or moving people, cargo, or freight within or adjacent connected to structure or excavation. And then we would remove the strike and put back in, including an escalator. But we have to remove it in the second and do the subsequent cleanup that we need to do to make it clear that this is what we've done.
All right, so Charles, I'm sure you understand that, but it would be to include escalators. And so yesterday it was pointed out that there are more injuries on escalators than there are on elevators. I would tend to say that that's probably because they're moving devices and people are bringing strollers and luggage and whatever, and maybe slipping and falling on them. However, it's not that great of a concern of mine that it's not on there. And the other side wants it in the spirit of compromise. I don't have any problem with the amendment. I consider it friendly. And in fact, there was a time when I was 18 years old that I was stuck on an escalator for almost a whole day until they could get it moving again. So I need a second on that motion if there is one. Seconded by Representative Poskin. Any further discussion on the escalator? Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was getting ready to ask that. I mean, I understand elevator has malfunction, has problems. I understand what happens there, but when an escalator fails or has a problem, what does it turn into?
Thank you for that question. I think I'm thinking of our poor younger version of our chair. I do think it is different than an elevator in that you're not trapped in an enclosed box, basically. But I do think there are some. I'm not familiar with all of the things that can go wrong on an escalator, but I can imagine it is motor driven or belt driven, and so I think it could probably be jarring or an abrupt stop or something that would cause a fall and could cause injury. So I think that's probably why we'd want to include that. I think it may be not just doesn't work and it becomes a staircase. I think there could be situations where it is a jarring experience.
Do we have any numbers on that? I mean, as far as accidents accidents that are caused by malfunction versus stupidity or not paying attention?
I think that's a terrible thing to say about our chair.
I didn't say it. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in cities that have these escalators and moving sidewalks all over the place. And sure, I see people that fall over the sides, fall down, and some of these go uphill, downhill. I mean, there's all kinds of them. And, but usually other substances are involved when I see these accidents. And if you go to try to help them, they can't even speak clearly, right? Because they're so, these other substances have impaired them so much. So I just mean, the fact, is would this be dire enough to have to add this back in because of malfunctions causing injury or malfunctions causing harm or undue stress or whatever?
Yeah, I've got.
Representative Clayton, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah,
that
yes, I
discussion, or you
do
have something?
actually, and I'm not just saying this because I have a lifelong fear of escalators. Now that's the thing you know about me. But the the Consumer Product Safety Commission says an average of 6,000 people per year are injured on escalators. Don't look at the videos. And granted, not all of those occur in the United States, but yeah, I would argue that escalators are actually a lot scarier than elevators. And so it really, I mean, the numbers do prove that.
When you say videos, are you talking about videos of people
Getting injured or killed on,
mistakes?
yeah, it's not.
Right.
You
their own
are not in
fruition,
there
right?
though, so it's okay if you were
Right.
worried.
Well, yeah. I'll leave that alone for now. Representative Osman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to echo those statements. Yeah, you don't want to look at the videos, but the fact is, we can easily joke. There's a Mitch Hedberg line about how elevators or escalators just turn to stairs. And that is true to an extent, but improperly maintained escalators can speed up and have everybody crash down at the bottom. They can also open up, and there's basically just gears and levers down below that will just rip you to shreds. And that happens on an improperly maintained escalator, is that you can fall through the stairs into the undercarriage.
Representative Williams, Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the carrier, so as we compare it to the other amendment, if it is as Representative Kessler pointed out, the fault of the user, which is so often the case with escalators, unlike elevators, does that mean that the escalator is not to be operated until an inspection is made to ensure that the accident that was reported was not caused by the user, but it could have been a malfunction? Or does the owner of the elevator get to determine they were stupid, they weren't paying attention, they tripped, they fell? I mean, who's determining, and is that a part of it? I'm not sure reading this, the other amendment.
So you're talking about the previous amendment that says if there's an injury that they can't use it until there's a fire marshal inspection. So Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For my purposes, all I'm trying to do is add the language of escalators back into the definition of elevator. So what I'm proposing doesn't address that specifically.
But by doing it, they would be included with this. And so if somebody fell off an elevator or got their luggage stuck and they hurt escalator and then they hurt themselves, and by law, that would need to be reported to the state fire marshal. And then the state fire marshal, if I'm understanding correctly, would need to come and check on this. And then therefore, to Representative Poskin's point, then you don't have easy accessibility for those that need accessibility, because it's got to be shut down just to determine whether or not it was a malfunction or if it was just the error of the user. And if that's the case, then I certainly cannot support the amendment, because by changing the definition, you're wrapping it up in a whole bunch of other regulatory requirements.
I think it's worth a conversation. I mean, definitely we don't want to shut down escalators because someone gets drunk and falls over the side of one. This is a sensitive topic for a lot of members on this committee, I know, but but I do think, like, if there's a way that we want to explore to create a distinction between a mechanical failure and a user failure, and then decide which way we want to go on that. I mean, I'm open to that discussion.
Representative Williams.
Well, just one last comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that when you have an escalator, it's much easier to see when it's malfunctioning, it's not operating, it stands still. You can use it as the stairwell, like so many other staircases, stairs, as so many others have said. So I feel like it's a very visible problem and it doesn't trap anyone. So it is a little bit different and it seems like it could have its own unique answer to that. Thank you.
Representative Probst.
With all that being said, and it's a little confusing because we have a number of amendments here, but maybe I will, since it is a conceptual amendment, I'll stick with the original inclusion of escalators in the language of elevator. And then in the previous amendment that you're referencing, we'll just put in a clause that excludes elevators from that, or excludes escalators from that provision. Would that satisfy your concern?
Is that good with the second? Is that good with you? Mr. Fire Marshal, thumbs up. He's good with it. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the Probst amendment, seconded by Representative Poskin, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say no. Motion passes. Any further discussion on the bill? All right, seeing no further discussion. Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just make this brief. I didn't support the underlying bill. I think that there's a lot of amendments here, and I think that they're, in general, they improve the bill. I think that each of the amendments seem to be good, but there are a lot of them. And I need to give some consideration as to what this does to the entirety of the bill and how it works as a whole. So for the purposes of the vote today, I'm not going to be in support of the bill. However, if it does come to the floor, I'll have a little bit more time to make my full consideration and might be modified at that point. Thank you.
Okay, that's all we can ask. All right, committee, I'm going to suspend discussion on that for now and draw your attention to Senate Bill 143. Yeah, we're going to put it into Senate Bill 143. Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to strip the contents of SB 143 and replace it with substitute for, I'm going to say, because we've had so much done to it, HB 2826, and pass it out favorably as amended multiple times.
Charles, is that worded correctly? Do we have to do a substitute amendment? Okay. So I misadvised the maker of the motion, so it's my bad. Representative Kessler.
Gotcha. Remove and put in. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start over again on that motion. I'd like to make a motion to strip the contents out of SB 143 and replace it with HB 2826. As amended.
Seconded by Representative Dodson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that we pass out SB 143, pass it out favorably as amended. As substitute bill.
Is that all right, revisers? And we would like to make it a substitute bill so that when it hits the floor, it's easy to read. Seconded by Representative Dotson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. Did you want to have your vote recorded, Representative Osman? No. No. Okay. All right. That's all we have on the agenda today. Tomorrow we are planning to work both of the daycare bills. So come prepared for that. Pack your lunch. It might be a long day.